Elizabeth Carter did not cry when they took her father's land. She did not cry when the last man who called himself her friend turned his horse and rode away without looking back. She picked up the axe. She swung it into the first log, and she swung it again, and again, until her palms split open, and her breath came in ragged gasps, and the whole town of Red Creek stood watching her from across the road laughing. She did not stop. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1882 came to the Arizona Territory like a punishment. The sun cracked the red earth into plates. The creek that gave Red Creek its name had dropped to a thin copper-colored ribbon. Ranchers worried about their cattle. Merchants worried about trade routes. And the people of Red Creek worried as they always did about other people's business. It was in that merciless summer that Elizabeth Carter arrived at the edge of town with a wagon and axe and 40 acres of land nobody else had wanted. She was 26 years old. She was not married. She was not slight, not pale, not the kind of woman that the women of Red Creek considered proper. Elizabeth was tall and full-figured, what the town's more charitable residents might have called a sturdy woman, and what its less charitable ones called loudly without shame when she walked past the general store. She had wide shoulders, thick arms built from years of real work, a round face with dark eyes that noticed everything, and a body that men in Red Creek looked at with their mouths twisted the wrong way, not with desire, but with amusement. She had grown up knowing exactly what people thought when they looked at her. She had spent 26 years learning not to let it stop her. What the town did not know, what none of them bothered to ask, was where she had come from and what had been taken from her to bring her here. 3 months earlier, Elizabeth had stood in a lawyer's office in Tucson and listened to her cousins divide her father's land between themselves. Her father, Gerald Carter, had died in February, a quiet man, a hard worker, a cattle rancher who had built his operation from almost nothing and left it in his will to Elizabeth, his only child, the daughter who had worked beside him since she was old enough to lift a bucket. Her cousins, Gerald's brother's sons' men, who had visited the ranch twice in 10 years, contested the will within a week of the funeral. A woman alone cannot manage a ranch of that size, the lawyer had explained in a tone that suggested he was doing her a kindness by being direct. She's got nobody to protect the investment, her cousin Robert had said, not even looking at her. It would only fall apart, her cousin James had added. Better it go to people who can handle it. Elizabeth had sat very still in that chair. Her hands were flat on her knees. She had looked at both of her cousins and then at the lawyer, and she had said quietly and clearly, "I ran that ranch for 4 years while my father was sick. I kept the books. I managed the hands. I negotiated every sale. You know that." "Yes, ma'am," the lawyer said. "But legally?" "I know what legally means." She did. She had understood it before she walked into the office. She had understood it the moment she saw Robert's expression at the funeral, the way his eyes swept across the property with the measuring look of a man calculating what belonged to him. She fought it. For 3 months, she fought every step of the process that stripped her father's ranch away from her name and handed it to men who had never sweated a day for it. She spent every dollar she had saved on legal fees. She wrote letters. She made the journey to Tucson 4 times. In the end, the court decided in her cousin's favor. Because she was a woman. Because she was unmarried. Because the law in 1882 had very clear ideas about what a woman alone could and could not be trusted to hold. She walked out of the courthouse, and she did not look back. She sold her horse. She sold her mother's silver brooch, the only piece of jewelry she owned. She sold the small savings she had kept in a tin box under her mattress. She added it all together, and she bought 40 acres of rocky, sun-beaten dead-grass land 8 miles outside Red Creek for $63 because it was all she could afford, and it was the only thing left with her name on it. Then she bought an axe. Then she borrowed a mule and a wagon from a sympathetic widow in Tucson named Mrs. Aldridge, who pressed her rough hand against Elizabeth's cheek and said, "You come back and visit me, girl. Don't you disappear." Elizabeth had promised she would. Then she drove that wagon north into the Arizona desert, and she got to work. She had been at it for 6 weeks when the people of Red Creek truly started paying attention. At first, they had watched from a distance with mild curiosity. A woman alone on a piece of worthless land, she'd give up inside a month, they said. She'd get scared or sunburned or lonely. She'd come to town looking for a husband or a buyer, and that would be the end of it. But Elizabeth did not come looking for anything. She came to town twice a week, once for supplies, once to haul water when her well wasn't producing enough. She walked into the general store run by a man named Franklin Holt, laid her money on the counter, asked for what she needed in plain English, and left. She did not chat. She did not apologize for her presence. She did not smile to soften the way people looked at her. And they did look. "Lord," said Doris Finch, the wife of the town's biggest cattle broker, loud enough for the whole store to hear the first time Elizabeth came in with sawdust in her hair and dirt on her face. "She looks like she's been wrestling hogs." "I imagine she has," said Holt from behind the counter, and several people laughed. Elizabeth counted her coins, picked up her nails and her bag of flour, and walked out. Outside, leaning against the post of the general store porch, a group of men watched her load her wagon. One of them, a younger man named Dale Riggs, who worked for the Caldwell Ranch, called out, "Hey lady, you need help with those bags." He said it the way men say things when they don't actually mean the offer, the way they say it to see if you'll take the bait. Elizabeth set the flour in the wagon. She tied it down. She picked up the reins. "No," she said. "Suit yourself," said Riggs. "Only asking because I wasn't sure you'd make it up." More laughter. She drove away without answering, but her jaw was tight the whole ride home. And that night, when she lay in the canvas tent that served as her shelter, she pressed her fists against her eyes and breathed through the tightness in her chest. The old tightness, the one she'd known since she was a girl. The one that came from being looked at like a punchline in a joke you didn't tell yourself. She breathed through it. And in the morning, she picked up the axe again. The cabin was taking shape in the way that things take shape when one person does every single part alone, slowly, imperfectly, and with a kind of stubborn dignity that doesn't ask for admiration. She had laid the foundation herself, using stones dragged from the base of the hill and fitted together with her own hands. She had cut the first logs from the stand of ponderosa pines along the northwest edge of her property. She had dragged them with the mule, a gray, bad-tempered animal she had named Luther, and she had learned by trial and error and a great deal of swearing how to notch them and set them. The walls were uneven. One corner sat a half-inch lower than the others. There was a gap between two logs on the north wall that she hadn't figured out how to fix yet. None of it was pretty. All of it was hers. She was working on the fourth wall of the cabin, on a Tuesday afternoon. Sweat soaking through the back of her dress. Luther tied to a post and grumbling about the heat when she heard hoofbeats on the road that ran along the edge of her property. She did not look up. It was Thomas Caldwell. She knew him by the sound of his horse, a big sorrel gelding that was too expensive for this part of the territory, and that Caldwell rode with the particular ease of a man who has never been uncertain about his right to take up space. Thomas Caldwell was 45, lean, silver-haired, and the largest landowner in the Red Creek Valley. He ran 4,000 head of cattle. He owned the flour mill and a share of the bank. He was by most accounts in Red Creek an important man. He had ridden past her property 3 times since she arrived, and each time he had looked at her land the way a man looks at something he intends to acquire. "Miss Carter," he said, pulling his horse up at the property line. She set the log she was notching down carefully, stood up, faced him. "Mr. Caldwell. Hot day to be working." "It is." He looked at the cabin walls. Something moved across his face, not admiration, not exactly contempt, more like calculation. "I'll give you $200 for the parcel," he said. Elizabeth looked at him steadily. "It's not for sale." "200 is 3 times what you paid. That's a fair deal, Miss Carter. More than fair." "I didn't buy it to sell it. You bought it to live on," Caldwell said, and his voice shifted into the tone that powerful men use when they're being reasonable. When what they actually mean is, "I've already decided this, and I'm giving you a chance to agree gracefully." A woman alone on a piece of land like this without hands to work it, there's a limit to what you can accomplish. I mean, no disrespect. It's simply a matter of practical reality. Practical reality, Elizabeth repeated. That's right. Then practically speaking, she said, my answer is no. And it'll be no the next time you come to ask, and the time after that. Caldwell studied her for a long moment. His horse shifted under him. You're a stubborn woman, he said. Yes, sir, she said. I am. He turned his horse. He rode back toward the road. And just before he reached it, he said without looking back, the land out here doesn't forgive stubbornness, Miss Carter. I hope you remember that. She watched him go. Then she picked up the axe and went back to work. From the ridge above the valley, William Dawson watched. He had not meant to watch. He had been riding the fence line of his own property, 160 acres of mountain meadow that abutted the foothills above Red Creek's valley, when the sound of the axe had caught his attention. Not the sound itself, which was common enough, but the rhythm of it. There was something in the way she worked. He had pulled his horse up on the ridge and looked down, and he had seen a woman in a faded blue dress driving a wedge into a pine log with the kind of focus that didn't leave room for anything else. He had watched Caldwell ride up. He had watched her stand straight and answer him without moving back an inch. He had watched Caldwell ride away with the careful, unhurried movement of a man who has not given up. He had watched the woman pick up her axe. William Dawson was 38 years old. He was not by any honest accounting a man who spent much time watching other people's business. He had come to his mountain property 5 years ago, after a decade of drifting ranch work in New Mexico, cattle drives to Abilene a year in Colorado that he preferred not to think about, and he had settled there with the intention of being left alone and returning the favor. How was 6 feet 2 broad through the shoulders, dark-haired with the start of gray at his temples. He had a face that had seen weather and hard years with deep lines around his eyes and a jaw that sat set and still most of the time. He was not a man people tried to make conversation with. He had a horse named Ranger, a dog named Catch, and a cabin that was better built than the one growing up below him. He watched the woman work. He watched her for longer than he meant to. When she lifted a log that had to weigh close to what she did and walked it to the wall on her own slow, controlled, refusing to set it down. Something in him went quiet in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not moved exactly, not pitying. Something closer to recognition. She's done this before, he thought. Not logs. Something else. She's been carrying things alone for a long time. He told himself it was none of his business. He rode back to his cabin. He thought about her work rhythm for the rest of the afternoon, without quite meaning to. 2 weeks later, the fire came. It started somewhere to the east in the dry grass and scrub that covered the lower hills, and it moved fast. The way fires move in Arizona, low and orange and purposeful, eating everything in its path with casual indifference. By the time Elizabeth smelled the smoke, the fire was less than a quarter mile from the eastern edge of her property. She ran. Not away. Toward it. She had a shovel and a pickaxe and a barrel of water she'd been saving for the cabin work, and she started digging a fire break with the kind of desperate, focused energy that doesn't allow itself to calculate odds. She threw dirt. She pulled brush. She overturned the barrel and soaked the ground nearest the cabin. From the road, people from Red Creek watched. A wagon had stopped 2 families, it looked like, who had been traveling out toward the Caldwell Ranch and had pulled up when they saw the smoke. They stood on the road and they watched the woman digging. They did not move. She'll lose it, one man said to another. Nothing to be done, the other answered. Fire's too wide. The woman kept digging. She was streaked with ash and sweat. Her dress was ruined. Her hair had come down from its pins and hung loose and wild around her face. Her hands were bleeding where the shovel handle had worn through the skin she'd only just managed to heal from the week before. She dug. The fire crept closer. And then hoofbeats came down the hill, fast, decisive, the kind of riding that has a destination. William's horse hit the flat ground at the bottom of the hill at a full gallop, and he pulled up 10 yards from Elizabeth off the horse before it fully stopped. He grabbed the shovel from a spot near the wagon without asking. He started digging parallel to where she was working, extending the fire break south toward the road. Elizabeth looked at him. She had never seen him up close before. Just a figure on the ridge sometimes when she glanced up. Move back from the direct line, he said without stopping. You're gonna lose the cabin if you fight it here. You need to push the brake further east." "I know what I'm doing," she said. "Then do it further east." She looked at the fire. He was right. She grabbed her pickaxe and moved. They worked side by side without speaking for 20 minutes. The people on the road watched in silence. The fire brake caught. It wasn't a wide margin. The fire came within 30 feet of the cabin's east wall before the brake held it and pushed it south, where it burned itself out against the rocky ground near the creek bed. But it held. Elizabeth stood in the ash and dirt, and she breathed. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise somewhere in the last 6 weeks that she would not cry in front of Red Creek, not once, not for anything. But her hands were shaking. She was looking at her cabin, at the 4 incomplete walls that were standing, at the fact that they were still there. "Thank you," she said. She said it to the open air in front of her, not turning to face him yet. "Yes, ma'am," William said. Then she turned. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at everyone without flinching or softening, and she said, "I didn't ask for help." "No," he agreed. "You didn't. I need you to understand that. I didn't ask." "I understand that." A pause. His face was composed, unreadable in the particular way of men who have spent too much time alone. But his eyes, dark, steady eyes, were looking at her the way almost nobody in Red Creek had looked at her. Not at her body. Not at the ash on her face, or the state of her dress. At her. "My name is William Dawson," he said. "I have the property up the hill." "I know," she said. "I've seen you." "Elizabeth Carter," she added after a moment. "Yes, ma'am, I know." A beat. "Your fire break angle's wrong," he said. "The north end. If there's another fire from the east, you'll lose the corner." She looked where he was pointing. "I can see that," she said. "I can help you fix it, if you want." She studied him. He was not offering with the tone that Dale Riggs had used, the offer that wasn't an offer, the one designed to expose your need and make it funny. He was offering the way a man offers a tool he happens to have that you happen to need. Practical, direct. She didn't trust it. She wasn't sure she trusted anything that came from Red Creek's direction anymore. But she was also standing in front of a fire break that angled wrong, and her hands were bleeding, and she was 26 years old, and she had not asked anyone for a single thing in 6 weeks. "All right," she said. It was not gratitude. It was not warmth. It was 2 syllables of cautious, tired, measured practicality. But William Dawson nodded like it was enough. And from the road, the people of Red Creek watched the cowboy from the mountain and the woman from nowhere stand in the ash together. And they said nothing, because for once, they did not know quite what to say. From his wagon seat, Thomas Caldwell watched too. He had arrived late at the edge of the small crowd on the road, in time to see William Dawson ride down the hill. In time to see the fire break hold. He watched Elizabeth Carter stand in the ruins of what the fire had missed. He watched William Dawson stand beside her. And something shifted behind his eyes, not respect and not surprise. Something colder. He had assumed she would fail quickly. He had assumed the land would come back to him, or come to him for the first time since it had never been his before the summer ended. A woman alone without money or hands or community, it was simple arithmetic. But the woman wasn't failing. And now the cowboy from the mountain was standing beside her. Caldwell turned his wagon back toward Red Creek. He had plans to make. That night, Elizabeth sat outside her tent, with her back against a wheel of the wagon and her hands wrapped in strips torn from an old shirt. The fire had spared the cabin. The walls were standing. She looked at the stars, which were thick and indifferent above the Arizona dark. She thought about the man on the ridge. She thought about his offer, the way he'd made it. She thought about the fire break angling wrong and decided she would fix it herself in the morning before he came back so she could look at him and say she'd already handled it. Then she thought about the look in his eyes. At her. Not past her. Not at the idea of her, the punchline, the stubborn fat woman building a ranch nobody thought she could build. At her. She pressed her wrapped hands together carefully and felt the sting of it. "Don't be foolish," she told herself. "You've got walls to finish." She went to sleep. In his cabin on the mountain. William Dawson sat at his table and did not read the book he'd opened. He stared at the fire in his hearth and thought about a woman standing in front of everything she owned, refusing to move. He had spent 5 years being certain that he was better off alone. He was suddenly less certain. It was an uncomfortable feeling. He wasn't sure what to do with it. He closed the book and went to bed and told himself it was practical. Just a neighbor situation, just geography. A woman with a badly angled fire break and a piece of land she was determined to hold. Nothing more. He told himself that for a long time before he finally slept. The next morning, she had already started on the fire break when he came down the hill. He saw it from 50 yards out, the new line of turned earth moving northeast, the way it should have been going all along. She was working with her back to the hill, methodical, her shoulders moving with the rhythm he had noticed from above. He pulled Ranger up at the property edge. "You already started," he said. "I did," she said. She did not stop. "Figured I'd come by and give you a hand. I can see that." A pause. "I didn't ask you to." "No," he said, "you didn't." She finally stopped, turned around. She was breathing hard from the work, and she looked at him with those dark eyes that measured everything and gave nothing away easily. "Mr. Dawson," she said, "I appreciate what you did yesterday. I mean that plainly. But I need you to understand something about how I operate." "I'm listening," he said. "I don't take charity, I don't take pity, and I don't need a man coming down from a hill to rescue me and then making a habit of it. What happened yesterday was a fire. That was an emergency. This," she gestured at the fire break with her shovel, "this is just Tuesday." He looked at her for a long moment. "Miss Carter," he said, "I don't do charity, and I don't pity you. You're the least pitiable person I've seen in a long time, if that means anything." It didn't move her face. "What I do," he continued, "is practical. You've got a badly drained northwest corner that's going to flood your cabin floor the first hard rain. You've got your lumber stacked against the wind instead of across it, so you're losing moisture off the cut ends. And your mule is tied on the south side of the lot, which means he's been in direct sun since dawn." She blinked. "Move Luther," she said after a moment. "That's what I'd do." A silence. "How'd you know his name? I heard you say it yesterday, when you were arguing with him about the water barrel." Something shifted in her expression, not quite amusement, but the shadow of it. "He doesn't listen," she said. "Most mules don't," he said. "But they learn." Another silence. She was looking at him with the evaluating look, not the suspicious look, not entirely, but the one that comes before you decide whether to let something in or keep it out. "If you want to be useful," she said finally, "the northwest corner. Not because I couldn't figure it out. Because it would go faster with 2 people." "I understand that," he said. "And I'll feed you lunch for the labor." "That's fair." "It is not charity," she said clearly. "It's a transaction." "Yes, ma'am," William Dawson said. He tied Ranger in the shade and went to help her with the corner. Neither of them said anything that wasn't practical for the rest of the morning. But Elizabeth Carter, fixing her northwest corner in the Arizona summer, with a man she barely knew working quietly beside her, felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not hope. Not yet. Something quieter than hope. Something that wasn't quite loneliness anymore. She wasn't sure what to call it. She kept working. He came back the next morning. Elizabeth heard Ranger before she saw William, the steady, unhurried sound of hooves on dry ground. The kind of pace that doesn't announce itself, but doesn't apologize either. She was already up. She had been up since before the sun cleared the ridge the way she always was, because sleep had become a thing she did in pieces, and daylight was the only currency she trusted. She did not turn around. She heard him dismount. She heard him tie the horse. She heard his boots on the ground as he walked toward where she was working the east wall. The gap between 2 logs she had been fighting with for 3 days, trying to figure out the right angle of the notch so the fit would be tight enough to matter. "You're at it early," he said. "I'm always at it early," she said. A pause. "What's wrong with the notch?" She exhaled through her nose. "It's reading wrong. The log wants to sit left, but the weight of the wall is pulling right." If I cut it to fit the pull, I lose the seal. If I cut it for the seal, it'll shift come winter. William stepped up beside her and looked at the gap. He did not offer an answer right away. He just looked the way a man looks at a problem he's taking seriously. That was something she had noticed about him. He didn't fill silence with noise. He let things be complicated until they weren't. "You need a shim," he said finally. "Half-inch cedar. Cut it on a bevel. Drives in from the outside wedges both directions at once." She looked at the gap. She looked at the wall. "That'll hold winter." "I've got a cabin that's been standing 11 years on the same fix," he said. "It'll hold." She did not say thank you. She said, "I don't have cedar." "I do," he said. "I'll bring a piece tomorrow." She turned to look at him, then sharp evaluating. "This isn't going to become a thing where you keep appearing with solutions, is it?" The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. "It might." "I told you how I feel about that. You told me how you feel about charity and pity," he said. "I'm not offering either one. I'm offering a piece of cedar." She stared at him for a moment longer. Then she turned back to the wall. "Fine," she said. "Bring the cedar." He brought it the next morning. And the morning after that, he came back with 2 extra hinges for the door frame she was struggling with. And the morning after that, he showed up when she was trying to move a log that was genuinely too heavy for one person, and he picked up the other end without being asked, without making a show of it, without doing anything except helping her get the log where it needed to go. He never asked permission for things that were obviously necessary. He never offered where she could manage alone. It was the most careful kind of help Elizabeth had ever received, and it unsettled her in a way she didn't have language for yet, because she had spent so many years bracing for help that came with a cost attached that she didn't know what to do with. Help that simply appeared, did its work, and didn't ask for anything in return except lunch. She always fed him lunch. It was a transaction. That was what she had called it, and that was what she kept calling it, even as the lunches got longer and the silences between them became less like silences and more like conversation that didn't need words. But the town had started talking. She knew it the 3rd time she went to Holt's General Store, and felt the shift in the air when she walked in, that particular stillness that happens when people stop talking because the person they were talking about just walked through the door. Doris Finch was there. She was always there. The woman had apparently made it her life's mission to know everyone's business in Red Creek, and she conducted this mission from the second stool at Holt's counter with the dedicated professionalism of someone being paid for it. "Miss Carter," Doris said. Her voice was honey over something rotten. "Mrs. Finch," Elizabeth said. She went to the counter. She put her list in front of Holt. "I hear you've had some company out at your place," Doris said. Elizabeth did not look at her. "I hear a lot of things too. William Dawson's been riding down from his mountain quite regularly, they say." "He's been neighborly," Elizabeth said. "I'll take a pound of nails, Franklin. The long ones." "Of course," Holt said. He had the uncomfortable expression of a man who is trapped between a customer he wants to keep and a situation he wants no part of. "Some people are saying—" Doris continued adjusting herself on the stool with the air of someone delivering news of great civic importance. "That it's interesting. A man like William Dawson, who hasn't come into town for more than supplies in 5 years, suddenly spending his mornings down in the valley." "People can say what they like," Elizabeth said. "It does raise questions." "About what?" Doris smiled. "About what a woman like you offers a man like him." The store went very quiet. Elizabeth set both hands flat on the counter, and she turned and looked at Doris Finch directly. Not with anger, or not only with anger, with something steadier than anger. With the look of a woman who has been spoken to this way enough times that the shock of it has long since burned away, leaving only clarity. "A woman like me," Elizabeth said. "You'd better finish that sentence, Mrs. Finch." Doris blinked. She had not expected to be addressed directly. People like Doris Finch counted on the target of their commentary being too ashamed or too polite to push back. "I only meant—" "You meant exactly what you said, so mean it out loud." Elizabeth's voice was level. "Say it so everyone in the room can hear what you mean when you say a woman like me." The silence in the store had a weight to it now. Doris's face had gone pink. I only meant that it's unusual. A woman in your situation, living alone, and a man coming by every day. My situation, Elizabeth said. Yes. My situation is that I own 40 acres and I'm building a cabin on it and my neighbor has been helpful. That is my situation. She picked up her nails from where Holt had placed them on the counter. I'd suggest you find a more interesting subject, Mrs. Finch. This one's going to disappoint you. She paid and she left. She held herself together all the way to the wagon. She held herself together driving out of town past the men who watched from the saloon porch, past the women who turned to each other on the opposite side of the road. She held herself together for 2 miles on the dry track that led back to her property. Then she pulled Luther to a stop in the middle of the road, and she put her face in her hands, and she breathed. Just breathed. In and out. The way she'd learned to do it. Not crying. Not quite just breathing through the pressure behind her eyes until it settled back down to something manageable. She couldn't afford to come apart. Not out here. Not where there was nobody to put her back together. She lifted her face. She picked up the reins. She drove home. William was there when she got back. She had given him the rough schedule of her supply days and told him flatly not to come on those days because she preferred to manage that alone. But he was there, and he looked at her face when she climbed down from the wagon, and he said nothing for a moment. "Bad trip?" he asked. "The usual kind," she said. He looked at her hands. She realized she was still holding the reins more tightly than necessary, and she made herself loosen her grip. "Doris Finch," she said, because it was going to come back to him anyway, it always did in a town like this. "She's decided our arrangement is interesting." Something crossed his face. What did she say? The usual kind of thing. Elizabeth unloaded the first bag from the wagon. That a woman like me, her words must be offering something specific to get a man like you to come around. The silence that followed was brief but dense. "I'll have a word with her," he said. "You absolutely will not," Elizabeth said immediately, turning to face him. "You will not ride into Red Creek on my behalf and correct anyone's thinking about me. Do you understand me?" "She's got no right. She's got every right to be wrong about me. People have been wrong about me my whole life, and they will go on being wrong, and that is not your problem to fix." Her voice was not raised. It was very flat and very clear. "The moment you ride into that town and tell people to mind their tongues about Elizabeth Carter, you become the man who defends Elizabeth Carter. And then this story becomes about what you're getting in exchange for the protection. You make it worse." He was quiet for a moment. "You've thought about this," he said. "I think about everything," she said. "That's how I've survived as long as I have." He looked at her with the steadiness that she was starting to understand was just how he was not a performance, not an act of patience, just the genuine quality of a man who did not react before he understood. "All right," he said. "All right," she repeated, and went back to unloading the wagon. He helped her without being asked. She let him. That was how things went with them for a while. A language built out of what was left unsaid, out of what was done, rather than what was offered, what was accepted, rather than what was announced. It was not a friendship yet, not exactly. It was something more cautious than that, and more substantial. It was trust laying its first careful foundation. The cabin walls went up faster after that. Not because William built them for her, he was clear that he wasn't there to do her work, but because two people working on separate tasks on the same structure create a rhythm together that one person alone can't manage. He would be on one end of a log, and she would be on the other, and they would walk it into position together with the economical communication of people who have learned to read each other's movements, who know when to wait and when to push. Left, she would say. Got it. Hold. Holding. Now. And the log would be in. He showed her the trick with the mallet for driving notches clean. She showed him that she'd developed her own technique for keeping the walls level, using a water-filled bottle she'd made into a crude spirit level, which he studied with what appeared to be genuine respect. "That's good," he said. "Where'd you learn that?" "I worked it out," she said. "By yourself." "Most things I know I worked out by myself," she said. "When you don't have anyone to teach you, you figure it out or you go without." He was quiet after that. In the particular way he got quiet when something she said landed somewhere in him that he wasn't entirely ready to look at. She noticed these moments. She filed them away without examining them too closely, because examining them too closely felt dangerous. They ate lunch on the flat rock near the east wall. It had become their spot without either of them naming it that. She made whatever she had. On good days, it was proper food beans and cornbread and dried meat. And on lean days, it was just cornbread and water. And William never commented on the difference. He ate what she gave him and seemed to mean it when he said it was good. "Can I ask you something?" she said one afternoon about 3 weeks after the fire. He looked up. "You can ask," he said. "Don't promise I'll answer." "Fair," she said. "Why are you here?" "What do you mean?" "I mean here, in Arizona, on that mountain." She gestured upward at the ridge where his cabin sat invisible behind the tree line. "You're not from here. The way you talk, the way you move, you've been a lot of places. So why here? Why alone?" He looked down at his hands. It was a long pause, long enough that she thought he'd decided not to answer after all. "I got tired," he said finally. "Of what? Of going somewhere and staying long enough to want to stay and then having a reason to leave." He said it simply without self-pity, like a man describing weather. "I figured if I stopped going anywhere, I'd stop losing things." She looked at him. "Did it work?" she asked. "More or less," he said. "Until recently." She looked away first. Neither of them said anything else for a while. But the thing between them, the cautious, careful thing, had just shifted a degree. Not dramatically, not in any way either of them would have admitted to if pressed. But shifted. In the way that slow burns shift quietly in the part of you that isn't watching. It was a week later that Dale Riggs showed up. He came on a Saturday, which was the day Elizabeth had gotten into the habit of mixing mortar for the chimney base. William wasn't there. He came 4 days a week, and Saturday was not one of them. She was working alone the way she'd worked for the first 6 weeks before any of this started, and she had her sleeves pushed up and her hair tied back and mortar on both hands up to the elbows. Riggs came with 2 other men she didn't know. He rode onto her property like he'd been there before, which he hadn't not once, and pulled up close enough to be rude. "Miss Carter," he said with the grin he always used. The grin that meant he was enjoying himself at someone else's expense. "Mr. Riggs," she said. She did not stop working. "We were passing by. Thought we'd stop and see how you're getting on." He looked at the cabin. "Coming along. Didn't think you'd get this far, honestly." "What do you want?" she said. One of the other men, younger, with a stupid smile, said something quiet to his companion, and both of them laughed. Elizabeth kept her face straight. "If you haven't got business here, I'd appreciate you moving on." "Now that's unfriendly," Riggs said. "We came in goodwill." "No, you didn't," she said. He looked at her like she'd surprised him, like he'd expected her to take the performance at face value the way she supposed most women in her position would. Like he'd expected embarrassment or gratitude or some fumbling attempt at graciousness. "I hear Dawson's been coming around," Riggs said. The grin shifted into something sharper. "Funny thing, he's never been the neighborly type before." "People change," she said. "Do they?" Riggs looked at the 2 men beside him. "I've known William Dawson for going on 6 years. He's not what you'd call the type to help a woman for nothing." The air changed. Elizabeth set down her mortarboard very carefully. She straightened up. She looked at Riggs and his companions, and she felt the thing in her chest that came up every time, the tightening, the heat, the shame reflex that she had spent 26 years fighting back every single time it tried to make her small. She did not let it make her small now. "Get off my property," she said. "Now hold on. I said get off my property, Mr. Riggs." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "Right now, all 3 of you." The stupid smile on the younger man faded. Riggs stared at her for a moment, the long measuring stare of a man who is deciding whether to push or to fold. He folded. "Fine," he said. "Just being neighborly." "You don't know what that word means," she said. "Ride." They rode. She waited until they were out of sight. Then she picked up her mortarboard and went back to work. Her hands were shaking just slightly, and she pressed them into the work to stop it. She was still working an hour later when she heard Ranger on the hill. She looked up. William came down the slope at a walk, not a gallop. He wasn't racing to her rescue, which meant he hadn't seen anything. He was just coming by. He'd decided to come on a Saturday. He pulled up when he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked. She looked at him. She almost didn't tell him. The reflex, I handled it, it's fine. I don't need to explain myself to anyone. Reflex was strong and deeply habitual. But she told him. She told him flat and factual, without editorializing, without the anger she'd felt. She told him what Riggs said, all of it. William's expression did not move while she spoke. The stillness in his face was not the stillness of someone feeling nothing. It was the stillness of someone feeling something that required considerable effort to keep contained. When she finished, he said, "I'll talk to Riggs." "No," she said. "Elizabeth, no." She looked at him directly. "I told you the last time. The moment you go defend my honor to Dale Riggs, you make it about you. About what you're getting. That's what they want, the story where I'm something being negotiated over. That's not. I know it's not. You know it's not. But they don't care what's true." Her voice was measured and careful and exhausted in the particular way that comes from having had this fight in some form your entire life. "I need you to trust that I know how this works better than you do. Because I've been navigating it since I was old enough to understand what people were saying about me." He was quiet. He looked at the ground, and then at her, and then at the unfinished chimney base. "It's not right," he said. His voice was low, not arguing, just saying. "No," she said. "It's not. But it's what is." Another silence. Then, "What do you need?" he asked. She blinked. The question surprised her, the simplicity of it. "What? Right now, today, what do you need?" She looked at the chimney base. She looked at the mortar. She looked at the part of the project she'd been dreading because it required holding two pieces simultaneously, and she hadn't worked out how to do that alone. "I need someone to hold the left side of the lintel while I set the mortar," she said. "Okay," he said. He dismounted. He tied Ranger. He rolled up his sleeves. He held the left side of the lintel. And somehow, in the way that the simplest things can undo you when you've been holding on for a very long time. Elizabeth had to look away for a moment and breathe very carefully before she could start setting the mortar. She got herself together. She set the mortar. She did not let a single thing show on her face. But she knew in that moment, in the precise moment, when he held the lintel and asked nothing in return and didn't make a single word out of any of it, that something in her that had been shut very tightly for a very long time was beginning slowly and against her better judgment to open. She was not ready for that. She was not sure she ever would be. But it was happening anyway. 3 days after that, Thomas Caldwell came back. He came in the early morning this time when the light was still rose-colored and the heat hadn't built yet. He came alone without the performance of horses or business clothing. He came like a man who had thought carefully about his approach. He pulled up at the property edge, and he called her name. She came out of the tent. She had her coffee in her hand, the one luxury she allowed herself, real coffee, not the chicory substitute. And she looked at him, the way she looked at everything, steadily, and without pretending to feel something she didn't. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Miss Carter." He looked at the cabin. The walls complete the chimney base, laid the door frame hung and waiting for its door. "You've made real progress." "I have," she said. "I came to offer something more generous than last time." He folded his hands over his saddle horn. $300, and a position on my ranch, housekeeper, cook, whatever suits you. You'd have a roof and a wage. You wouldn't have to do this anymore." She looked at him. "Do what?" she asked. "Struggle," he said, simply like he was doing her a kindness. "I'm not struggling," she said. "Miss Carter, I am building," she said. "There's a difference. A person who's struggling is trying to stay where they are. I am going somewhere." She took a sip of her coffee. "The answer is still no." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then something shifted in his expression. Something that had been polite and almost sympathetic became something else, something colder and more precise. "Let me be plain with you," he said. Please, she said. You're a woman alone on unproven land, with no capital, no community support, and no legal protection if something goes wrong. You've made an enemy of the town's goodwill. I never had the town's goodwill, she said, and the friendship of a man who will move on when something more convenient presents itself, because men like William Dawson always do. He said it without cruelty, which made it worse, like he was just describing physics. I'm not asking you to give up. I'm offering you a soft landing before the hard one comes. Elizabeth set her coffee cup down on the wagon wheel beside her. She looked at Thomas Caldwell with absolute clarity. What I hear, she said, is that you want my land. He opened his mouth. Don't, she said. Don't do the part where you explain again how much you're doing for me. You want the land. You've wanted it since I got here. And you're going to keep coming up with reasons why I should give it to you until one of them works, or you try something else. She picked up her coffee again. So let's save some time. None of them are going to work. And I'll be watching for what comes next. Caldwell looked at her for a long, still moment. You're making a mistake, he said. Then it's mine to make, she said. He rode away. She watched him go. She was still watching when William came down the hill. An hour later, she had sent him a message the day before through a boy in town, asking if he could come in the morning, which was the closest she'd gotten to asking him for anything that wasn't practical. He read her face the moment he rode up. Caldwell, he said. Caldwell, she said. He dismounted. He stood beside her and looked at the road where Caldwell had gone. He's going to try something else, she said. I know, he said. Something legal, probably. Or something that looks legal. She turned to face him. This was the moment she had been working up to, the moment she had been turning over in her mind for 3 days, since Riggs, since the lintel, since the thing that was opening inside her that she hadn't asked for and couldn't seem to stop. William, he turned to look at her. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly and not kindly. Not kind to spare my feelings, honest, actually honest. All right, he said. Why are you still here? Because Caldwell said something this morning that was wrong about most things, but might be right about one of them. Men like you, men who've been moving for a long time, they move on when something easier comes up. She held his gaze. I need to know if that's you, because if it is, I need to know now before... She stopped. Before what? He asked. Quiet. Not pushing. Just asking. She looked at him. Before this matters more than it already does, she said. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone in longer than she could remember. It cost her something to say it. She felt the cost in her chest, the exposure of it, the risk of it, the fact that she had just handed him something and she couldn't take it back. William looked at her for a long time. I've moved on from a lot of things, he said finally. Places, jobs, people. He looked down at the ground the way he did when he was making sure what he said was accurate. But I haven't moved toward something in 5 years. Not until I watched you stand in front of a fire and refuse to leave what was yours. He looked up. I'm not going anywhere, Elizabeth. He said her name the way he did when the conversation had moved past being practical, which was rarely, and which always meant something when it happened. She held his gaze. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, if Caldwell goes legal, I'll need someone who knows the territory. Land records, deeds, the county office in Tucson. I know the county clerk, he said. We'll get your records in order. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, he said. She nodded. She turned back toward the cabin. We've still got work to do today. We do, he agreed. He followed her. And the town of Red Creek, which had laughed at the stubborn woman on the worthless land, had no idea yet what was coming for it. Had no idea that the two quiet, damaged, careful people working on that cabin were building something that had nothing to do with logs and mortar and everything to do with it at the same time. Had no idea that Thomas Caldwell, riding back to his ranch with cold purpose in his eyes, was already making plans that would force both of them into the open. Had no idea that the story was only beginning. The county clerk's office in Tucson smelled like old paper and lamp oil, and the particular staleness of rooms where important things happen to ordinary people without ceremony. Elizabeth sat across from a man named Harold Briggs, who had the pale, careful look of someone who spent his life among documents and preferred it that way. William sat beside her. Not beside her, the way a husband sits beside a wife, not performing anything, just present in the way he had become present over these weeks, like a solid thing. You stop noticing until you reach for it in the dark, and it's there. Harold Briggs spread the papers across his desk. "The deed is clear," he said. "Registered in your name, Elizabeth Ann Carter. Purchased legitimate and recorded the 14th of May, 1882. He looked at her over his spectacles. "There is no legal mechanism by which Thomas Caldwell can contest ownership." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. "Then why," she said, "did he tell me last week that the land deed had irregularities?" Briggs blinked. "What irregularities?" "He didn't specify. He sent a letter. Said the original survey had a boundary dispute from 1879 and that his ranch's original title may overlap my northeastern corner." Briggs looked at the deed. He looked at a second document William had brought from his own files, a survey map he'd kept from when he'd purchased his own mountain property, which shared the same original land office district. William tapped the map without speaking. Briggs leaned forward. He looked for a long time. "There was a boundary dispute in 1879, he said finally, between the Caldwell parcel and the old Morrison homestead. That dispute was settled in 1880, in the court record." He looked up. "The Morrison land was subsequently subdivided and sold. Your parcel is from that subdivision." "So the dispute is settled," Elizabeth said. "It's been settled for 2 years, Briggs said. "Caldwell knows that." The room went quiet. Elizabeth looked at William. William was looking at Briggs with the still careful expression that she had come to understand meant he was filing something away. "He knows the dispute is settled," William said. "Not a question." "Any man with access to these records knows it," Briggs said. "And Caldwell has access. He's been in this office 3 times in the past 2 years on his own land business." Elizabeth set her hands flat on the desk. "So he's lying," she said. Briggs cleared his throat. "I wouldn't characterize. He's telling me my deed has irregularities when he knows it doesn't," Elizabeth said. "What would you call that?" Briggs looked uncomfortable. "I would call it a matter for an attorney." "I don't have money for an attorney," she said. "Then I would call it—" Briggs paused. "I would call it a situation that benefits from documentation." He looked at her directly, which she got the impression he didn't do often. "I can give you certified copies of all relevant records. Today. At no charge as a matter of public record access. If someone were to attempt a legal challenge based on a boundary dispute they know to be resolved, those copies would make very short work of it." Elizabeth looked at him. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Briggs glanced at William, then back at her. "I have been a county clerk for 19 years, Miss Carter. I have seen this particular maneuver before." He began gathering papers. "I find it distasteful." He made the copies. He was thorough about it. They rode back toward Red Creek with a leather envelope of certified documents in Elizabeth's saddlebag, and the particular feeling that comes from finding out you were right about something you'd hoped you were wrong about. "He's not going to stop with the letter," Elizabeth said. "No." William agreed. "What does he actually want?" William rode in silence for a moment. "Your northeast corner runs along the Crow Creek tributary. The creek's been drying up further south every year. Your section stays wet longer. There's something underground there. Springs may be running off of the mountain." He looked at her. "A man who runs 4,000 head of cattle in a drought year would pay considerably more than $300 for reliable water access." Elizabeth stared ahead. "He doesn't want the land," she said. "He wants the water. And if he can make your deed seem uncertain enough, he doesn't have to pay for it at all," William said. "He just has to outlast you." She thought about that for the rest of the ride. She turned it over, the way she turned problems, all the way around, looking at every face of it. By the time they reached the turnoff toward her property, she had made a decision. "I need a well dug," she said, "at the northeast corner." William looked at her. "If there are springs," she said, "I want them documented. surveyed, on record, not as a boundary marker, as a water right. Water rights are a separate filing, he said. I know. Can it be done? He thought about it. I know a surveyor. Ex-army, does private work. Honest. He paused. It'll cost. How much? He told her. She was quiet for a moment. I have enough, she said. Barely. But enough. She could feel him looking at her profile. You calculated that, he said. Just now. I've been calculating since I got here, she said. I know exactly what I have and what I can spend and what I cannot afford to lose. She glanced at him. I've been poor before, William. Not uncomfortable, poor. The kind where you count every nail. You get very precise. He didn't say anything right away. Then, I'll ride for Everett tomorrow. Have him out by Thursday. She nodded. Thank you, she said. It was the first time she'd said it to him directly, clearly, without the armor of calling it a transaction or a practical exchange. Just thank you, plain and honest. She saw what it did to his face, the slight shift, the thing that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it, the look of a man who has been given something small and clean and doesn't quite know how to hold it. You're welcome, he said. It was the most ordinary exchange they'd had. It felt like the most significant. They reached the fork in the road. He would go north toward the mountain. She would go south toward the property. They pulled up. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. She rode south. He watched her go longer than he meant to before he turned north toward the mountain. Everett Marsh arrived Thursday morning, a compact, weathered man in his 50s who moved like someone accustomed to measuring things and finding them exactly where they should be. He had a transit chain, a notebook, and the particular economy of speech that comes from spending most of your professional life outdoors, talking to tape measures. He walked Elizabeth's northeast corner with William and with her, and he did not make a single comment about what she was, or who she was, or why she was there, which she found so refreshing she nearly mentioned it. He found the springs in 2 hours, 3 of them feeding up through the rock shelf along the base of the foothill, running clean and cold into the tributary. He documented them with the thoroughness of a man who had done this long enough to know that the difference between documented and undocumented was the difference between ownership and argument. These are significant, he said, looking at his notebook. Particularly in this section of the valley. The Caldwell Ranch runs dry every August. His upper pasture shows it. Elizabeth looked at William. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Filing for water rights. Everett continued. You'll want to do it through the territorial office, not just county. I can write up the survey to support that. He looked at her. This is worth protecting properly. Do it properly, she said. He filed within the week, and Red Creek exactly how information moved through small towns, the way water moved through cracked ground, finding every available fissure. But by Saturday, when she went to Holt's for supplies, the quality of people's attention had changed again. There was something in it now that hadn't been there before. Not respect yet, not quite. But the first distant cousin of it, the thing that happens when people who thought a situation was simple discover it is more complicated than they assumed. Doris Finch was not on her stool. Franklin Holt handed her the supplies without comment. Then, as she was turning to leave, he said quietly, "The Caldwell Ranch foreman was in here yesterday, asking questions about your deed." She turned back. What kind of questions? Who you'd been talking to, whether you'd been into Tucson, whether anyone had helped you file anything. She looked at him steadily. What did you tell him? Holt met her eyes. I told him I sell dry goods and I don't know other people's business. He paused. Which is mostly true. She looked at him for a moment. Franklin Holt was not a bad man. He was a man who had let things happen in his store without stopping them, because stopping them had costs he hadn't been willing to pay. She understood that. She didn't respect it entirely, but she understood it. Thank you, Franklin, she said. Miss Carter. He nodded once. You be careful. She went back to her wagon. She was careful. But she wasn't careful enough for what happened 4 days later. She had gone to the northeast corner alone. William was not expected until Thursday, and she was checking the spring markers that Everett had left, making sure the survey stakes were where they'd been when she found the first one pulled. She stood and looked at the hole where the stake had been. She looked at the second stake. Pulled. The third. Pulled. Every survey stake along the northeast boundary of her property pulled from the ground and gone. Not fallen pulled. Deliberately. She stood in the middle of her property with the morning sun on the back of her neck, and something very cold moved through her that wasn't fear and wasn't anger yet. It was the predecessor of both. The moment when the situation reveals itself to be something larger than you'd named it. She walked the full boundary. All of them. Gone. She went back to the cabin. She sat on the step. She breathed. She was still sitting there when William came down the hill an hour later. Not Thursday, not scheduled. He was riding faster than usual. He pulled up. He looked at her face. "What happened?" She told him. He dismounted before she finished. He was already moving toward the northeast corner. "Show me," he said. She walked him along the boundary. He looked at each empty hole without speaking. He crouched at the last one and looked at the disturbed earth. "Last night," he said. "Ground still loose." "Caldwell," she said. "Or someone who works for him," he said. "Same difference." She stood with her arms crossed and felt the cold thing in her chest working its way toward heat. "Without the stakes, the survey is just a document," she said. "If he contests the boundary in court, he can argue the stakes weren't properly placed." "The survey is filed," William said. "The stakes are supplementary," she said. "I know, but it complicates it." She turned to face him. "He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to make it complicated enough that I run out of money and patience before he does." William looked at her. His jaw was set in the way it got when something was required of him that he was still deciding how to answer. "I'll replace the stakes," he said. "He'll pull them again." "Then we'll document the pulling," William said. "Every pulled stake is evidence of interference with a filed survey. That's a territorial offense." He looked at her. "We stopped letting him operate in the dark." She thought about it. "We'd need witnesses," she said. "I know 3 men who will testify to what they see," he said. "Honest men, not Caldwell's people." She looked at him. "Your people." "People who know me," he said. "People who know my word." She understood what he was offering. I was offering to put his name into this publicly formally, in a way that would attach him to her in the eyes of Red Creek, with no ambiguity remaining. He was offering to make this his fight as well as hers. I was offering the thing she had told him twice not to give her. But this was different. This wasn't riding into town to scold Doris Finch. This wasn't protecting her honor in the way that made her into something being negotiated over. This was standing beside her on her own land and making certain what was true could be seen to be true. She understood the difference. 3 men, she said. 3, he said. When? I'll send word today, he said. They can be here by tomorrow evening. She nodded. He turned to go. William. He stopped. She looked at him, really looked the way she had been, careful not to do too often, because looking at him that way was the thing that made her most aware of how much had changed and how quickly and what it might cost her if she let it go further than was safe. Thank you, she said, again. The same 2 plain words. But they meant something different this time, and they both knew it. He looked at her with everything he kept composed. Most of the time suddenly visible for just a moment, the steadiness, the care, the particular loneliness of a man who has spent 5 years on a mountain because he didn't trust himself to stay anywhere looking at a woman who made him want to stay. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. He rode up the hill. She watched him. Then she went back to work because there was still work to do, and because standing still for too long gave the fear room to move in. The 3 men came the following evening. Caleb Foster, broad gray-bearded, ran sheep on the west side of the valley and had known William Dawson for going on 7 years. Jed Monroe, younger, quiet, a carpenter who had done work for William's cabin 2 summers ago. And a man named Aaron Wright, who had formerly been a deputy in the neighboring county and now ranched a small spread 15 miles north, who carried himself with the particular alertness of someone trained to watch. Elizabeth fed them supper. She did it without fuss. Cornbread, beans, dried beef, strong coffee, and she sat at the table with them and William, and they talked through what had happened and what they were going to do about it. Aaron Wright asked good questions, specific ones, the kind that told her he understood the legal dimension of the situation without her having to explain it. "If we witness another stake removal," he said, "we can sign affidavits. A former deputy's affidavit carries weight in territorial court." "I know it does," Elizabeth said, "which is why I'd like you to be the one closest to the northeast corner." Wright looked at her with something that was unambiguously respect. "You've thought this through." "I've had time," she said. Caleb Foster, who had been quiet through most of the meal, watching Elizabeth with the measuring look of an older man who has met a lot of people and takes his time forming opinions, set down his coffee cup and said, "I'll be honest with you, Miss Carter. When Will told me what was happening, I figured I'd come out here, take a look, and decide for myself what kind of person I was being asked to help." Elizabeth looked at him. "And," she said. "And I'm glad I came," he said. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" He thought about it. "Someone who needed rescuing," he said. "That's not what I see." "No," she said. "It's not." "What I see," he said, "is someone who had everything taken from her by people who thought they could and who decided they were wrong." He looked at William. "I'll stay as long as you need me." William said nothing, but the look he gave the older man said everything that needed saying. They set the stakes again the next morning. All along the northeast boundary replaced and marked with additional witness posts that bore the survey date and Everett Marsh's registered seal hammered so deep that pulling them would require real effort and real time, the kind of time that makes a man visible. 3 nights they waited. On the second night, it rained a hard fast. Arizona rain that drummed on the cabin roof and turned the dirt to mud and made the watch uncomfortable. Elizabeth brought coffee out to Aaron Wright at his position near the northeast corner at midnight, holding a lantern low. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Somebody does," he said. She went back to the cabin. She sat at the table in the dark with her hands wrapped around a mug, and she listened to the rain. William came in from his watch at the west side at 1 in the morning. He was soaked through. He sat at the table across from her, and she poured him coffee, and neither of them spoke for a while. "If this were your land," she said finally, "would you have quit by now?" He looked at her. "No." "Because it's yours." "Because I built it," he said. "Same reason you won't quit." She looked at her hands around the mug. "I keep thinking," she said, "that there's a version of this where I'm wrong, where I'm being stubborn past the point of sense, where the practical thing—" She stopped. "Is to take the money and the job and the soft landing," he said. "Yes." "And—" She looked up. "And I tried imagining it," she said. "Taking his offer, living in his house, working his kitchen. I tried to see it clearly all the way through." She paused. "All I could see was my father's face, the way he looked at that ranch, the way he used to say that a piece of land with your name on it was the one thing that couldn't be taken." She stopped. "They took his. They're not taking mine." William was quiet. Then he said, "My father sold the only land we ever had when I was 12, needed the money, said we'd get it back someday." He looked at the table. "We never did. He spent the rest of his life working other men's land and calling it practical." He looked up. "This," he said, "is not the version where we take the soft landing." She looked at him across the table, in the rain, in the dark, with coffee going cold between them. She looked at him, and she understood in the way you understand something that has been true for a while before you let yourself see it, that she was not alone in this. Not the way you aren't alone when someone is helping you. She had been helped before, and she knew the difference. She was not alone, the way you aren't alone when another person has decided without announcement or conditions that what matters to you matters to them. She had not had that in a very long time. She did not know what to do with it. So she picked up her mug and she said, "Get some sleep. I'll take the next watch." Elizabeth. "Sleep," she said. "You'll be useless tomorrow if you don't." He almost argued. Then he did the thing she was beginning to understand was one of his rarest qualities. He listened. He was asleep in the chair by the fire in 20 minutes. She took her lantern and went out into the rain. On the third night they came. 2 men. Moving along the northeast fence line just after 2 in the morning, working quickly and with the efficiency of people who had done this before, or who had been told exactly what to do and where to go. Aaron Wright was 15 feet away when they pulled the first stake. "Hold there," he said. They ran. I didn't chase them. He had the presence of mind of a man trained in exactly this situation. He looked at their faces in the lantern light, memorized what he saw, and he called out William's name loud, so that William, coming from the cabin at a run, was there within a minute. They had the stake in the bag they'd brought. Evidence, and not in their favor. Wright wrote it down in his notebook while he was still standing at the fence line in the dark, by lantern light, names, descriptions, time, circumstances. He signed it. William signed as witness. Caleb Foster, who had arrived at a run from the west side, signed. Jed Monroe signed. Elizabeth signed. She stood in the wet dark, and she signed her name below 4 men who had stayed on her land in the rain for 3 nights, and she felt something move through her that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite relief. It was something quieter than both. The feeling of a door that has been pushed against for a long time finally giving. "We take this to the territorial office," Aaron said. "Monday morning first thing. This is interference with a filed survey. I know the marshal's deputy in Tucson. He will not ignore a signed affidavit from me." She nodded. She looked at the northeast corner of her land, the corner where the springs ran cold and clean underground, where Caldwell had sent men in the night to take what wasn't his. She thought about Thomas Caldwell sitting in his ranch house waiting for word. She thought about what his face would look like Monday afternoon when word came back the wrong way. She almost smiled. Almost. "Thank you," she said. "All of you." She looked at each of them in turn, Wright, Foster, Monroe, and then last at William. "I don't have words for this." "You don't need words," Caleb Foster said. "You need sleep and dry clothes." He looked at William. "Both of you." They went inside, and for the first time since she had arrived at her 40 acres of dry Arizona land, Elizabeth Carter did not lie awake calculating. She lay down in her tent, and she closed her eyes, and she was asleep in minutes, the long, heavy sleep of someone who has been running for so long that stopping feels like falling, and who has finally found ground solid enough to land on. In the morning, she built a fire. She cooked a real breakfast, eggs and salt pork and cornbread, proper food. And she called the men from wherever they'd slept, and she set plates in front of them, and she sat at the table, and she ate. William sat across from her. He looked at her face, rested more than he'd seen it, the particular quality of someone who has slept without armor for the first time in a while, and something in his own face settled. "Monday," she said. "Monday," he agreed. They ate in the good silence that had become their most honest language, the silence that didn't ask anything, that didn't explain itself, that was just 2 people being in the same place without the effort of managing it. Outside, the Arizona morning was doing what Arizona mornings do after rain, turning the world clean and copper and sharp-edged, the light hitting everything at the angle that makes ordinary things look worth keeping. Inside, at a table built from 2 barrels and a plank in an unfinished cabin, Elizabeth Carter drank her coffee and let herself feel for a few minutes what it was like to have fought for something and not lost yet. She did not allow herself to think about what Caldwell would do next. Not yet. That would come. But for now, breakfast. Sunlight. The sound of 4 men eating food she had cooked, and one of them looking at her across the table with dark, steady eyes that said, without words, without performance, without any of the things she had learned to distrust, "I'm here." She looked back. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The territorial marshal's deputy was a man named Samuel Cross, thin, methodical, with the air of someone who had seen enough frontier disputes to stop being surprised by them, but had not yet stopped caring about their outcomes. He received Aaron Wright's affidavit on Monday morning, read it twice, asked 3 precise questions, and then looked at Elizabeth across his desk with the neutral expression of a man forming a professional opinion. "You filed water rights," he said. "I did," she said, "and the survey was registered with the county office. Certified copies here." She put them on his desk. He looked at them. He looked at Wright's affidavit again. He looked at the additional signatures, William Foster Monroe, and then back at Elizabeth. Miss Carter, he said, I want to be plain with you. Please, she said. Thomas Caldwell is a significant presence in this territory. He has relationships with men in this office and in the county judiciary. He folded his hands. I am telling you this not to discourage you, but so that you understand what you're entering. I understand it, she said. What you have here, he touched the affidavit, is strong. Interference with a filed survey is a territorial offense. A former deputy's testimony is credible. Your documentation is thorough. He paused. But Caldwell has resources you don't. He does, she agreed. And a legal challenge, even a losing one, can be expensive. I know that too. Cross looked at her for a moment. Then at William, who was sitting beside her in the same way he had sat in Harold Briggs's office, present solid, not performing anything. The men who pulled the stakes, Cross said, described in the affidavit. We know who they are. Both work for the Caldwell Ranch. He stood. I'll be riding out to have a conversation with Mr. Caldwell by end of week. Elizabeth felt something release in her chest. Just slightly. Just enough to breathe differently. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Cross said. This is the beginning, not the end. He was right. Caldwell's response came not through the marshal's office and not through the law. It came through the town. By Wednesday, Red Creek was talking about a meeting. Thomas Caldwell had called it himself a community gathering. He framed it a discussion about land use and water rights in the valley, open to all property owners in the district. He had sent word to every ranch and farm within 15 miles of Red Creek, and he had done it in the particular way of powerful men who have decided that if they cannot win in one arena, they will change the arena. The meeting was set for Friday evening at the Red Creek Church Hall. Elizabeth found out about it Thursday morning from Franklin Holt, who told her about it with the uncomfortable urgency of a man delivering news he's not sure he should be delivering. He didn't send you notice directly, Holt said. But it's a public meeting. I know what it is, she said. Miss Carter. He stopped, started again. You should know that the way he's framing it, the water rights, the survey dispute, he's making it sound like your filing affects water access for the whole valley, like you're claiming something that belongs to everyone. She went very still. That's not what the filing says, she said. No, Holt said. But most people in this valley haven't read it. She looked at him. Are you going to the meeting? He met her eyes briefly, then looked away. I expect I'll be there. She nodded once. She picked up her supplies. She walked out. She rode back to the property faster than usual, the kind of riding that has something to work out. William was at the cabin when she arrived, fixing the door hinge that had been stiff since the frame went up, and he took one look at her coming off the horse and said, "What happened?" She told him. He listened without interrupting, which was his way. When she finished, he set down the hinge and the screwdriver, and he said, "He's going to try to make this about the community." Yes. Make it seem like your water rights threaten everyone else's water. Yes. Which is false. Completely. The filing is for documented springs on my property. It doesn't touch the creek rights that the rest of the valley uses. She crossed her arms. But false things said loudly in a room full of worried people have a way of becoming true enough. William looked at her. You're going, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm going, she said. So am I. She looked at him. William. Not to protect you, he said before she could say it. To stand in the same room and be seen standing there. There's a difference. She understood the difference. She had drawn it herself weeks ago, standing in her own dirt with mortar on her hands. All right, she said. He picked up the hinge again. I'll finish this door first. She almost smiled. She went inside and made coffee. They rode into Red Creek together on Friday evening, which was its own kind of statement, not announced, not performed. Just the fact of two people arriving at the same time and walking through the same door, which a town like Red Creek reads, the way it reads everything with complete attention and immediate interpretation. The church hall was full. Not every face was hostile. That was the first thing Elizabeth registered as she walked in. Not every face was hostile, and more of them were neutral than she had expected. Caleb Foster was there against the east wall, and he gave her a nod that felt like it had substance to it. Jed Monroe was near the back. Aaron Wright had ridden down from his spread and was standing near the door with his arms crossed and his expression professionally unreadable. Doris Finch was there naturally in the second row, vibrating with the anticipatory energy of someone who has been looking forward to a spectacle. Thomas Caldwell stood at the front of the room. He looked at Elizabeth when she walked in. His expression did not change. He was too careful for that. But something moved behind his eyes, a calculation rapid and cold. And then he looked at William beside her, and the calculation completed itself, and he looked away. He began the meeting with the tone of a reasonable man. That was the most dangerous thing about Thomas Caldwell. Elizabeth had come to understand. He did not present as a villain. He presented as a practical man making sensible points, and his reasonable voice was the delivery mechanism for things that were neither reasonable nor sensible, but sounded that way until you took them apart. "We're all in the same territory," he said. "We all depend on the same water table. When one property files exclusive rights to a water source that feeds the regional water table. That's not what the filing says." Elizabeth said it from where she was standing near the middle of the room. She did not raise her hand. She did not wait to be called on. She simply said it clearly in the tone she used when stating facts. Caldwell paused. The room went alert in the way rooms go alert when they sense a confrontation. "Miss Carter," Caldwell said, "we'll have time for... The filing covers 3 springs on my documented property, fed by underground water specific to the rock shelf on the northeast corner of my land." She was not yelling. She was not performing. She was talking the way Everett Marsh had talked, with the precision of someone who has read the documents and knows what they say. "It does not claim any portion of Crow Creek or the Valley Water Table. The Territorial Water Rights Office has documentation of this." She looked at the room. "I'm happy to read the relevant sections aloud if that would help." The room was quiet. Someone in the back said, "Let her read it." It was Jed Monroe. He said it quietly, but it carried. Caldwell's voice lost a fraction of its smoothness. "This isn't the appropriate format for..." "Then what format would you like?" she asked. "You called this meeting to discuss my water rights filing. I'm here to discuss it." She looked at him directly. "What exactly would you like to say, Mr. Caldwell?" She heard William beside her breathe in and out slowly. Not from nerves. From the specific calm of a man who is watching something happen that he had hoped would happen. Caldwell looked at the room. He was recalibrating, she could see it. He had planned for a meeting where he spoke and others listened, and Elizabeth Carter, if she came at all, could be managed at the margins. He had not planned for Elizabeth Carter standing in the middle of his meeting and asking him to be specific. "The concern," he said, choosing each word now with visible care, "is that unrestricted private water rights claims set a precedent that affects everyone in this valley." "What restriction are you proposing?" she asked. He blinked. "If you have a specific objection to the filing," she said, "state it. If you want to propose a community water compact that applies equally to all property owners in the district," she paused, "I'll consider it, as long as it applies equally." The word equally landed in the room with weight. "I'd support a community compact," said Caleb Foster from the east wall. "Equal terms, all properties. That's reasonable." "So would I," said a voice from the back she didn't recognize. "Seems fair," said another. Caldwell looked at the room. His room. The room he had called. He looked at the faces that were supposed to be aligned with him, and he saw the thing that happens when a clear statement of equal terms is made in public. People find it difficult to oppose without revealing what they actually want. He looked at Elizabeth. And for the first time since she had arrived in Red Creek, Thomas Caldwell looked at her not as a problem to be managed, but as an opponent to be reckoned with. She held his gaze. She did not smile. She did not telegraph victory. She just held his gaze and let the room sit in what had just happened. It was Doris Finch who broke it. "The issue isn't the water rights," Doris said loudly from the second row. She had clearly decided that if the meeting was going sideways, she would steer it somewhere she preferred. "The issue is whether a woman alone with no husband and no established standing should be making claims on community resources that affect everyone." The room shifted. Elizabeth felt it shift the way it moved through the air of the hall like a change in temperature. She had been waiting for this, because Caldwell was a problem that could be addressed with documents. But this was older and thicker and harder, and it lived in the room like smoke, and it was the real thing. She had been fighting since the day she arrived. She turned and looked at Doris Finch. "My standing," she said, "is my deed, my documented water rights, my filed survey." She kept her voice even and direct. "If there's a different kind of standing, you think I require a husband, a father, someone to speak for me, because I cannot speak for myself. I'd like you to say so clearly, so that everyone in this room understands exactly what standard you're proposing." Doris's chin came up. "A woman in your position." "What position?" Elizabeth said. "Say the position. You are unmarried. You are—" Doris's eyes moved across Elizabeth's body in the brief dismissive sweep that Elizabeth had been receiving her whole life. "You are not what most people in this community would consider. Stop." It was William. The room went absolutely still. He had not spoken until this moment. He had been standing beside Elizabeth without a word, exactly as she had asked, exactly as he had understood, present visible, not overriding. But now he spoke, and when William Dawson spoke in a tone like that in a room like this, the room listened. "What you're doing," he said, looking at Doris Finch with the particular directness of a man who has been patient for a long time and has reached the end of it, "is looking for a reason that has nothing to do with water rights or land law or community interest. You're looking for a way to say that she doesn't count." He paused. "Say it plainly if you mean it, because I'd like to hear what this town actually believes when it isn't hiding it behind practicality." The silence was total. Doris Finch's mouth opened and closed. Nobody in the room spoke. William looked at Caldwell. "You've sent men to pull survey stakes off her property. The Territorial Marshal's office has the affidavit. You've sent a letter claiming a boundary dispute that your own deed history refutes." His voice did not rise. It was very steady and very clear, and it had in it the quality of someone who has nothing to hide and knows it. "If you have a legal claim to any portion of Elizabeth Carter's land or water rights, file it. We'll see you in court." He looked around the room. "If this meeting is about something else, about whether a woman alone has the right to own land and defend it, then I think most people here know where they stand on that. And I think most of them know where they want to be seen standing." He stopped. The room was still. And then Caleb Foster said from the east wall in his unhurried older man's voice, "I know where I stand." Monroe said from the back, "So do I." Aaron Wright unfolded his arms and said nothing, but moved 2 steps forward from the door in a way that was itself a statement. And something happened in that room that Elizabeth had not allowed herself to expect. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the small individual adjustments of people who have been watching a situation and forming private opinions, and who are in this moment deciding which version of themselves to be publicly. A rancher named Ed Harlow, who had not spoken to Elizabeth once since she arrived, said, "What does an equal community compact actually look like?" A woman named Marjorie Stout, whose husband owned the feed store, said, "I'd want to see the filing before I form an opinion." Someone else said, "Can we see the document?" Elizabeth reached into her jacket. She had brought copies. She had prepared them the night before, with the particular foresight of someone who had learned not to arrive anywhere without the thing she might need. She had made 7 copies of the relevant sections written in clear and careful hand. She distributed them. The room read. Caldwell stood at the front and watched the room read Elizabeth Carter's water rights documentation, and he was smart enough to know what was happening. Not that he had lost, not entirely, not yet, but that the ground had shifted in a way that made his next move considerably more complicated. He left before the meeting formally ended. Nobody commented on it directly, but everyone noticed. After outside the church hall, in the dark of the Red Creek Street, Caleb Foster shook Elizabeth's hand, a formal, firm handshake, the kind that means something specific in this part of the world, the kind that says, "I see you as an equal, and I mean it." "You handled that well," he said. "I handled it the only way I know how," she said. "Straight." "That's the right way," he said. He looked at William. "You've got good people beside you." He nodded once and walked to his horse. Marjorie Stout stopped beside Elizabeth on her way past. She was a small woman, compact and quick-eyed, and she looked at Elizabeth with the expression of someone who has just revised an opinion and is honest enough to acknowledge it. "I said something to my husband about you," Marjorie said. "Last month, I said—" She stopped. "It wasn't kind." Elizabeth looked at her. "I'm telling you, because I think you probably heard worse from people who weren't willing to admit it afterward," Marjorie said. "And because I'd rather you know I know it was wrong." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. Marjorie nodded. She went to her husband. Elizabeth stood on the board sidewalk of Red Creek's Main Street, and she looked at the town, the lit windows, the noise from the saloon down the block, the whole ordinary life of a place that had decided she was a joke before it knew her name, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not belonging. Not yet. Maybe not ever entirely. But the first small territory of something adjacent to it. The sense that the world in which she existed was slightly larger than it had been this morning. William stood beside her. "You brought copies," he said. "7, she said. You knew what he was going to say. "I knew what he was going to try to do," she said. "He was going to make it about fear. Drought, water, scarcity, uncertainty. Turn the room against me by making me the source of their worry." She looked down the street. "You can't argue with fear directly. You have to replace it with something more specific." He looked at her profile. "Where did you learn that?" "My father," she said. "He used to say, don't fight people's feelings. Give them something solid to hold instead." She paused. "He was a good man. He deserved better than what happened to his land." It was the first time she had said that out loud, that direct, plain statement of grief. Not the facts of what her cousins had done, which she had stated before, but the grief of it, the wrong of it. William said nothing for a moment. Then, "He'd be proud of you." She breathed in. She breathed out. She did not trust herself to speak for a moment. She looked at the far end of the street where it became dark road, and then open territory, and then her land sitting in the Arizona dark waiting for her. "I'm not done yet," she said. "No," he said, "you're not." They rode home in the dark without a lantern, because they both knew the road well enough by now to not need one. It was a warm night, dry after the rain, and the stars were enormous. The way Arizona stars get in late summer, and neither of them spoke for most of the ride, and that was all right. At the fork where he would go north and she would go south, they pulled up. She had been thinking about something for the last mile, turning it over. She had been careful for so long. Careful with what she let herself feel. Careful with what she let herself want. Careful with how much of herself she put in the proximity of something that could hurt her. But she was also 26 years old, and she had stood in a room full of people who doubted her, and she had not flinched, and she was tired. Suddenly, profoundly tired of being careful with the one thing that she had let matter. "William," she said. He turned to look at her. "I want to ask you something." "Ask," he said. She looked at him directly the way she always did, no armor in the question, just the question itself, because she was not someone who knew how to ask things sideways. "When this is done," she said, "when the legal part is settled, and Caldwell has made his last move, and my water rights are secured, and the cabin roof is on, what do you do then?" He held her gaze. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean, do you go back up the mountain?" she said. "To being alone. To the way things were before," she paused. "Because I need to know. I'm not asking you to make me a promise. I'm not asking you to be something you're not built to be. I just—" She stopped, started again. "I need to know if I'm building this alone." The night was quiet around them. Ranger shifted under William, the small sound of the horse settling. William looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "I told you once I wasn't going anywhere." "You said that," she said. "But that was about the land fight. That was about Caldwell. I'm asking something different." He was quiet again. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say. The quiet of someone who is making sure that when they say a thing, they mean it the whole way through. "I've been up on that mountain for 5 years," he said. "Telling myself it was strength. Telling myself I didn't need anything I didn't have." He looked at his hands on the reins. Then I watched you carry logs alone and refused to put them down." He looked up. And I stopped believing what I'd been telling myself. She waited. "I'm not going back up the mountain," he said. "Not the way I was before. Not to being that alone." He held her gaze. "I don't know what that means yet exactly. I don't know how it looks. But I know I'm not going back." She looked at him. She felt the thing in her chest that had been opening slowly, and against her better judgment for weeks, she felt it open the rest of the way. Not recklessly. Not with the rush of someone who has stopped being careful. But with the measured, deliberate, fully aware decision of a woman who has survived enough to know that some things are worth the risk of wanting. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. It was not a declaration. It was not the kind of thing you put in a letter or wrote down anywhere. It was two people at a fork in a road in the dark, saying the plainest version of the truth they knew. "Good night," she said. "Good night," he said. She turned south. He turned north. And the thing between them, which had been building with the same care and stubbornness and daily labor as the cabin walls below, was no longer a thing that could be called by any other name. 3 days later, Samuel Cross rode out to the Caldwell Ranch. He told Elizabeth about it afterward, not all the details, but the shape of it. He had spoken with Caldwell for 2 hours. He had presented the affidavit, the survey documentation, the certified boundary records from the county office, and Briggs's statement about the boundary dispute that had been settled 2 years prior. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said he'd been misinformed about the survey history," Cross said with the dry expression of a man who has heard many creative descriptions of deliberate actions. "And the stakes." He expressed regret that his employees had exercised poor judgment, Cross said even more dryly. She looked at him. "Is that going to be the end of it?" she asked. Cross considered. "I believe Mr. Caldwell is a man who understands costs and benefits," he said. "The cost of a territorial interference filing combined with a losing boundary challenge in the current climate." He paused. "I expressed to him that these costs could be avoided if the matter was concluded here. And he agreed that the boundary as filed was correct and the water rights as registered were legitimate." Cross looked at her. "In writing, signed." She sat very still. "He signed it," she said. "This morning," Cross said. He put the document on her table. Her kitchen table. She had a kitchen table now, 2 boards on sawhorses, but a table nonetheless. She looked at the document. Caldwell's signature neat and controlled at the bottom. Above it, in Cross's official hand, a statement of non-contestation of the Carter property deed and water rights as registered. She had not expected this. She had expected the legal fight, months of it, the grinding, expensive territorial court battle that Caldwell had the resources to sustain far longer than she did. She had been preparing herself for it. Steeling herself. She had not prepared herself for winning this round quietly. "Why?" she said. Cross looked at her carefully. "I think," he said, "that the meeting at the church hall cost him more than he anticipated, politically." He paused. "A man in his position depends on being seen as the reasonable option in any dispute. When that perception shifts..." "He cut his losses," she said. "He calculated," Cross said, "which is what he does." She looked at the document. She thought about her cousins in the Tucson lawyer's office, dividing her father's land with the ease of men who had never questioned their right to do so. She thought about the first morning she had driven out to these 40 acres alone with an axe and a mule and no plan except to begin. She thought about every pulled stake and every laughing face outside Holt's General Store, and every morning she had gotten up in the dark and picked up the tools and gone back to work. She thought about William at the fork in the road. She picked up the document. She folded it carefully and put it in the leather envelope with the deed and the water rights filing, and Briggs's certified copies, and everything else she had gathered piece by piece to build the case for a life that was hers. "Thank you, Deputy Cross," she said. "Miss Carter," he said. He stood. He put his hat on. At the door he stopped and looked back at her. "For what it's worth, in 19 years, I haven't seen many people hold a position the way you've held this one." She looked at him. "My father taught me," she said. "A piece of land with your name on it is the one thing they can't take." Cross nodded. He walked out. She sat alone at her two-board table in her unfinished cabin on her 40 acres of Arizona land, and she held the leather envelope in both hands, and she let herself feel for exactly as long as she needed to, the full weight of what she had just not lost. Then she heard Ranger on the hill. She set the envelope down. She stood up. She went to the door. William was coming down the slope at his usual pace, unhurried, present the specific quality of movement of a man who is going somewhere he intends to be. She waited in the doorway. He pulled up. He looked at her face. "Cross came," he said. "He came," she said. And she held up the envelope. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Caldwell signed," she said. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, not relief exactly, but the particular expression of someone who has been prepared for the hard version of a thing and has just been told the hard version isn't coming. The careful loosening of someone who has been holding on. He dismounted. He walked to the door. He stood in front of her, and he looked at her, the way he had looked at her from the ridge all those weeks ago, at her not past her. And she looked back at him with the same steady directness she brought to everything, except that there was nothing managed about it now. Nothing careful, just what was true. "It's not over," she said. "There's still the roof, the water well, the southeast fence line, winter coming." "I know," he said. "I'm still going to be difficult," she said. "I know that too," he said. She looked at him. "You should probably come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." He crossed the threshold. She went to make the coffee. Outside on 40 acres of red Arizona earth, the cabin stood 4 walls, a chimney, a door that hung true on its new hinge. Not finished. Still becoming. But standing solid and real against everything that had tried to stop it from standing. The way some things do when the person building them refuses to stop. The roof went on in October. It took 11 days. 4 of them lost to wind that came down off the mountains with the kind of serious intent that makes tools useless and arguments pointless, and it was the hardest physical work Elizabeth had done since the fire. Harder maybe, because the fire had been emergency and adrenaline, and she hadn't had time to feel it until it was over. The roof was deliberate. Every beam, every board, every strip of tar paper measured and placed with full awareness of what it meant and what it cost. William was there for all of it, not doing it for her, with her. There was a difference. She had stopped needing to explain, and he had stopped needing to be told. He worked from the north side, while she worked from the south, and they met in the middle. The way they had been meeting in the middle of things for months now, without announcement, without ceremony, just arriving at the same point from different directions and finding each other there. The day the last board went down, Elizabeth stood on the roof and looked out at the valley. She had not planned to stand up there. She had been driving the last nail, and then she was done, and she just stayed. The valley spread out below her in the October light, the dry grass and the distant dark line of the creek, and the road that wound into Red Creek, and the ridge where William's cabin sat invisible behind the pines. She could see everything from up there. She heard him on the ladder. He came up and stood beside her and looked at what she was looking at. "How's it feel?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Like it's real," she said. "Like I kept waiting for it to stop being real, and it didn't." He nodded. "That's how it feels," he said. "When something's actually yours." She looked at him. "When did you feel it?" she said. "With your place." He thought about it. "Second winter," he said. "First winter, I still felt like I was borrowing it. Second winter, the cold came down, and I was inside, and I didn't feel like leaving." He paused. "That was when I knew." She looked back at the valley. "I'm not waiting for the second winter," she said. He looked at her profile. "No," he said. "I didn't figure you would." They came down off the roof together, and she made coffee, and they sat on the step of the cabin. Her cabin with a roof on it, with 4 walls, and a door that hung true, and a chimney that drew clean and drank it in the October afternoon. And neither of them said much, because there wasn't much that needed saying right now. That was the day Marjorie Stout came by. She drove her wagon out from town with her husband beside her, a broad, quiet man named Phil, who had the look of someone who lets his wife do the talking, not because he can't, but because she does it better, and she pulled up at the property edge and called out Elizabeth's name. Elizabeth stood. "Mrs. Stout," she said. Marjorie climbed down from the wagon. She looked at the cabin. She looked at the roof. She looked at the chimney and the door and the four walls with their careful, imperfect, entirely real notching. "We brought something," Marjorie said. Phil Stout got down from the wagon and went to the back of it. He lifted out a rocking chair. It was a good one, solid wood, well made, the kind of thing someone had taken time over. Elizabeth stared at it. "It was my mother's," Marjorie said. "She passed 2 years ago. I've had it in the storeroom because I couldn't decide what to do with it." She looked at Elizabeth steadily with the frankness of a woman who has made a decision and is seeing it through. "I'd like you to have it, for the porch when you build one, or inside for now." Elizabeth looked at the chair. She looked at Marjorie. "I can't take your mother's chair," she said. "You can," Marjorie said, "because I'm giving it, and because—" She stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. "Because I owe you something, and I don't know how to give back what I actually owe you, so I'm giving you this instead." The weight of it sat in the air between them. Elizabeth understood what Marjorie was saying. Not just about the chair, about the things that had been said in Holt's store, and at the meeting, and on the street before the meeting, and in the 100 small ways that a community tells a person they are not wanted. She looked at the chair. She looked at Marjorie. "Thank you," she said. Phil Stout carried the rocking chair inside without being asked. He set it by the fireplace that Elizabeth had built herself, stone by stone, which drew imperfectly, but would improve with curing, and he nodded once at William on his way back out with the nod of men who don't need to speak to understand each other. Marjorie stayed for 20 minutes. She drank coffee, and she looked around the cabin interior, and she said practically, and without sentimentality, "You'll want shelving on that east wall. Phil can help with that if you want. He's better at shelving than he is at most things." Elizabeth looked at her. "Tell him I'll feed him lunch." Marjorie almost smiled. "He'll take that deal." She left. Elizabeth stood in the middle of her cabin alone for a moment, while William was outside seeing to the horses, and she looked at Marjorie Stout's mother's rocking chair sitting by her fireplace, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and breathed very carefully until the tightness in her chest settled. It was the chair that did it, not the meeting, not Cross and the signed statement, not even the roof. The chair. Because the roof was hers, and she had built it, and the legal victory was hers, and she had fought it, but the chair was something given freely without negotiation, just because someone had decided she deserved to have it. She had not expected to be given things. She composed herself before William came back in. He looked at her face when he came through the door. He did not say anything. He went to the fire and put more wood on it, and let her have the moment without naming it, which was exactly the right thing to do, and she was grateful for it, in the way she was grateful for most of what he did, quietly, completely, without making a production of it. "Phil Stout builds shelving," she said. "I know," William said. "He's good at it." "You know everyone," she said. "I've been in this territory a long time," he said. "Even on a mountain you know people." She sat in the rocking chair. She had not meant to. She had not planned to sit in it right now in front of him, like a person who had been given something and was feeling it, but she sat in it because her legs made the decision before her head caught up, and it was exactly the right height, and the rockers moved smooth and true on her dirt floor, and she sat in it and looked at the fire and felt the particular thing that she had been moving toward for 6 months without letting herself name it. She felt at home, not just in the cabin, in the life she had made in it, in the version of herself that had carried every log and driven every nail and stood in every room where people doubted her and refused to be made small. She felt at home in that person. "William," she said. "Yeah," he said. He was leaning against the wall near the fireplace, arms crossed, watching the fire. "I want to ask you something." "You can ask me anything," he said. He said it like he meant all of it, not just the easy questions. She looked at the fire. "Do you think you could be happy here?" she said. "Not on the mountain, down here, on this land." The question sat in the room. He looked at her, not quickly, not with surprise, but with the slow, full attention of a man taking a question seriously. "Are you asking me to stay?" he said. "I'm asking if you want to," she said. "There's a difference." He was quiet. She waited. She was good at waiting. She had spent 6 months learning to wait on the things that mattered, the logs to seat right, the mortar to set the law to move the ground to tell her what was underneath it. She could wait on this. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what the place up the hill is for." He looked at his hands. "I built it to be alone, and I was alone in it, and it was a kind of life." He paused. "But I've been coming down this hill every morning for months, and every morning when I can see your cabin from the ridge, something in me—" He stopped. "Something in me settles," he said, "like a thing that's been wound too tight for too long and finally finds the right tension." She looked at him. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I want to stay." She nodded. She looked back at the fire. "I'm not easy," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm difficult and I'm stubborn, and I don't ask for help when I should, and I keep accounts of everything, and I will argue with you when I think you're wrong." "I know," he said. "I'm not going to be different than I am," she said. "Elizabeth," he said, and his voice had the particular quiet weight it got when he was saying something he needed her to hear. "I came down off that mountain because of exactly who you are, not in spite of it." She breathed in. She breathed out. She pressed her hands flat on the arms of the rocking chair, and she looked at the man leaning against the wall of her cabin. Her cabin with its imperfect notching, and its true-hung door, and its roof that had taken 11 days and had been worth every one of them, and she felt the last careful wall inside her come down. Not collapse. Come down. The way you put something down deliberately when you've decided you don't need to carry it anymore. "Then stay," she said. He looked at her. "All right," he said. It was the simplest conversation they had ever had. It was also the most important one. He stayed for supper. He stayed after supper. And when it was late, and the fire had burned down to coals, he rode up the mountain, because that was where his things were, and where his animals were, and there were practicalities to be managed. But he rode up the hill differently than he had ridden up it before, with the specific weight of a man who is going somewhere to gather his things rather than to stay. Elizabeth sat in the rocking chair by the dying fire, and she listened to Ranger's hoofbeats on the road going north and then going quiet, and she thought about all the mornings she had woken alone in the tent before the cabin was built, and all the mornings after in the cabin before the roof was on, and she thought about her father's voice saying a piece of land with your name on it is the one thing they can't take, and she thought it was almost true that was almost all of it, but not quite. Because the other thing they couldn't take, she was coming to understand, was who you were when you built it. The first snow came in November, not heavy. Arizona Territory was not Minnesota, and the valley snow was thin and brief and gone by afternoon. But it came, and it came on a morning when William arrived at the cabin before it started, which meant he was inside when it did, which meant they both stood at the cabin window and watched it fall in the particular silence that the first snow of the season always makes. "Your roof's holding," he said. "It is," she said. She made him coffee. They stood at the window together and drank it and watched the snow, and it was the most ordinary morning she had had in longer than she could remember, and she was aware of its ordinariness, in the way you're aware of things you hadn't known you were hungry for until they're in front of you. He moved down from the mountain 2 weeks later. Not formally, not with announcement. He brought his tools first because the practical things happen first and the rest follows. Then he brought Catch the dog, a rangy border collie mix who inspected every inch of the cabin with the focused efficiency of a professional, and then settled in front of the fireplace like he'd always lived there. Then his books. Then his saddle gear. His cabin on the mountain he would keep. They decided this together practically because mountain property with springs was worth keeping, and because neither of them were people who burned their options. But he came down, and every morning after that, when Elizabeth woke before the sun, because she was still that person, the one who woke early and got to work before the day had fully committed to being a day. There was coffee already on when she came out of the back room, because he was that person too, the one who woke early and had quiet things to do before he was ready for talking. They moved around each other in the cabin, the way they had moved around each other on the building site, with the economy of people who have learned each other's rhythms without making a formal study of them. It worked. That was the thing that surprised her least and moved her most. It just worked. Not effortlessly. Not without friction. They argued about the fence line in December seriously and at length because she wanted to run it one way and he wanted to run it another, and they were both right about different aspects of it. And it took 3 days and a conversation that got louder than she intended before they reached a solution that was better than either of the original options. She had not apologized for getting loud. He had not expected her to. That was when she knew. Christmas came, and with it something she had not expected. A letter. It came through Holt's store, forwarded from a Tucson address, and Franklin Holt handed it to her with an expression that suggested he knew what it was and had his own feelings about it. She opened it at the counter. It was from Robert, her cousin, the one who had not looked at her in the lawyer's office while he took her father's ranch. She read it standing at the counter. William was with her. He read nothing over her shoulder. He looked at the nails display on the opposite wall and gave her the space that the moment required. She finished the letter. She folded it. She put it in her pocket. Elizabeth, William said. Not a question. Just her name, the way he said it when something had happened. I wants to sell the ranch, she said. Her voice was level. My father's ranch. He and James have decided it's more trouble than it's worth. He's offering me right of first refusal. She looked at the counter. Out of respect for your father's wishes, he says. Holt behind the counter had the grace to look at the wall. William said nothing. She took the letter back out of her pocket. She looked at it again, Robert's handwriting neat and self-satisfied, even on the page. How much? William asked. She told him the number. He was quiet for a moment. That's fair market for a property that size. It is, she said. Do you have it? No, she said. Another pause. I do, he said. She looked at him. My mountain property, he said. If I sold it the water rights alone to the right buyer. He stopped. We could combine. Your water rights here, the springs, my land up the ridge. As a package to a rancher who needs reliable water in drought years, it's worth considerably more than what Robert is asking. She stared at him. You'd sell your mountain, she said. I built it to be alone. He said the same words he'd used before, but differently now. I'm not alone anymore. She looked at the letter. She looked at William Dawson, standing in Franklin Holt's general store in Red Creek, Arizona, offering to sell the only land he owned to buy back the land that had been taken from her father. She felt that the thing that had been slowly, carefully, at great personal cost. Opening in her, it opened the rest of the way. All the way. No reserve, no management, no calculation. That's my father's land, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I know, he said. It's not just the money, she said. It's he built it. He worked it for 30 years. He meant it to be mine. She stopped, pressed her lips together. They took it because they could. Yes, he said. If I could take it back. You can, he said. She looked at him. The steadiness of him. The particular quality of a man who has made his decision and is not performing its certainty, but simply has it. This is too much, she said. What you're offering. It's too much to accept. It's a land deal, he said. Between partners. He held her gaze. Unless you see it differently. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it meant, not just the practical shape of it, the selling and buying the combined property and the water rights and the ranching operation that could actually credibly be built from the combination of what he had and what she had and what her father had built. She thought about what it meant to accept it. To let another person's resources combine with hers, without the careful wall that said, this is mine and that is yours, and we account for each transaction separately. She thought about Marjorie Stout's rocking chair, about things given freely. Partners, she said. That's what I said, he said. She breathed in. I want it in writing. The corner of his mouth moved. I'd expect nothing less. She replied to Robert's letter that afternoon from the writing table that Phil Stout had built when he came to do the shelving, and he had been right. He was excellent at shelving, and she wrote the reply in the clear, direct hand that she wrote everything. She said she was interested. She said she would be in Tucson after the new year to discuss terms. She said she required full documentation of the property's current condition and any debts against it. She did not say please. She did not say thank you for remembering your family obligations. She said what she meant, and she signed her name, Elizabeth Ann Carter. She sealed the letter. She handed it to William. "Will you take it in tomorrow?" she said. "First thing," he said. That night, they sat by the fire. She in the rocking chair. He in the straight-backed chair he'd brought from the mountain, and they talked about it. About what it would actually look like. The combined operation. Her 40 acres and these springs, his mountain land, her father's ranch that had once been Gerald Carter's and could be again. Not in his name, in hers. They talked until the fire burned low, and the practical details had been turned from every angle, and the shape of it was solid enough to build from. Then he said in the quiet that came after the planning, "Your father would be relieved." She looked at the coals. "He worried about me," she said. "After my mother died, when it was just us, he used to say he worried about leaving me alone, that the world was harder on women alone than it ought to be." She paused. "He wasn't wrong." "No," William said. "But I wasn't alone," she said. "Not really, not even at the start. I had his voice in my head every morning telling me to get up and pick up the axe." She looked at William. "And then I had you." He looked at her. "Not because I needed rescuing," she said. "I know," he said. "Because—" She thought about how to say it. She was not a woman who talked about feelings easily or often or without being sure she meant what she said. "Because you're the first person who saw what I was doing and decided it was worth staying for. Not fixing, not managing. Just—" She searched for the word. "Worth," she said. "You decided it was worth." He held her gaze. "It is," he said. She looked back at the fire. "Go to bed," she said. "We've got fence line to run tomorrow." He stood. He looked at her once more, the steady, full look that she had stopped flinching from because she had stopped expecting it to cost her anything. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. He went to bed. She sat in the rocking chair in the dark with the coals going orange and quiet in the fireplace, and she sat in the life she had built, and she let it hold her. The new year came. The trip to Tucson was everything she had expected it to be. Robert was slick and careful and tried twice to renegotiate terms he had already agreed to in writing, and both times Elizabeth said no in the clear, unhurried tone she had developed for exactly this purpose, and by the second afternoon, the papers were signed. Gerald Carter's ranch changed hands. It went into the name of Elizabeth Ann Carter and William James Dawson as equal partners, documented and registered with the county office in Tucson, certified copies in the leather envelope that Elizabeth had been adding to since the first trip to Harold Briggs's office 6 months and a lifetime ago. On the way out of the county clerk's office, Elizabeth stopped on the steps. Just stopped. William stopped beside her. She was looking at the street. At nothing specific. Just the street, the people moving through it, the ordinary afternoon life of Tucson, which had no idea what had just happened in an office above it. "You all right?" William said. She thought about it. "My father bought that land when he was 22, she said. "He saved for 4 years. He said the day he signed the deed was the day he believed his life was real." She paused. "I always thought he meant the land made it real." "But," William said. "But I think he meant the proving of it," she said. "The building of the thing. The fighting for it." She looked at William. The land was just where the real part happened. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "We should get on the road before dark." "We should," she said. She came down the steps. They rode north together toward Red Creek, toward the valley, toward 40 acres of Elizabeth's land, and the combined property they would build from it, and the season's work waiting for them. The fence line, the second well, the barn that needed to go up before spring. The work that was and would be and would keep being, because that was the nature of the thing they had built. Not finished. Never finished. Always becoming. They were 3 miles out of Tucson when William said without particular setup, "I'd like to ask you something." She glanced at him. "Ask." "I know you don't need a husband," he said. "I know you don't need anyone to speak for you, or hold anything for you, or stand in front of you when things get difficult." He was looking at the road ahead. "You've made that clear, and you were right to." She waited. "But I'd like—" He stopped, started again. He was not a man who stumbled over words often, and the stumble itself said something. "I'd like the life we're building to have the right name on it," he said. "Both of us. Permanent." He looked at her. "If that's something you want." The road stretched out ahead of them. The Arizona winter light was low and copper and very clear. She looked at the road for a moment. She thought about 26 years of people telling her what she was and wasn't, what she could and couldn't hold, what she was worth and what she was not. She thought about the deed with her name on it, and the water rights with her name on it, and the registered survey with her name on it. She thought about everything she had built with her own hands, and her own stubbornness, and her own refusal. The long refusal. The refusal that had started before she knew what she was refusing and had brought her here. She thought about William Dawson on the ridge, watching a woman carry a log and refuse to put it down. She thought about what it meant to choose something, not to need it, not to settle for it. To choose it with full knowledge and full intention because it was right and real and worth choosing. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Just that. Just yes. Clean and direct and completely without qualification." He looked at her. The thing in his face. The careful, composed, long-held stillness broke open just for a moment. Just enough to see what was underneath it. What had been underneath it she understood now for a long time. Then he looked back at the road. "All right," he said. She looked at the road too, and the horses carried them north toward the valley, toward the land, with 2 names on the deed, toward the life they had built from the ground up, with bleeding hands, and borrowed cedar shims, and 7 copies of a water rights filing, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but shows up every morning, and picks up the other end of the log. The kind of love that is less like lightning, and more like a cabin. Built piece by piece in all weather, by people who refuse to stop. Red Creek saw them ride in together that evening, and said what Red Creek always said, everything, and most of it wrong. But some of it by now had started to shift. Not all at once. Not dramatically. The way things shift in small places, one person at a time, one revised opinion, one moment of seeing something they had decided they already knew, and finding it more complicated and more worthy than they'd given it credit for. Marjorie Stout waved from the feed store porch. Franklin Holt nodded from his doorway. Caleb Foster, riding the other direction, touched his hat brim to Elizabeth in the specific way of a man who means it. She did not wave back effusively. She did not perform gratitude or graciousness for their revised opinions of her. She nodded because nodding was honest, and she rode on because there was still work to do, and she was still and would always be the kind of person who went home and got back to the work. But she felt it, the slight and permanent shift in the temperature of the town around her. The degree of difference between being looked at like a problem and being looked at like a person. It was not everything. It was not nothing. It was what the world gives you when you hold your ground long enough, not its full approval, which was never the point, but its reluctant, qualified, gradually genuine recognition that you were always exactly what you said you were. That night, the cabin held them both, the rocking chair by the fire. Catch asleep on the hearth. The leather envelope on the shelf, with its stack of documents that said in the language that the world understood that this life was real and registered and theirs. Elizabeth sat by the fire and thought about her father. She thought about the morning she had driven out to the 40 acres alone with an axe and a mule, and the specific absolute determination of someone who has been told what they cannot do so many times that the word cannot has lost all meaning. She thought about every morning after. She looked at the fireplace she had built stone by stone, the walls she had notched herself, the door that hung true on new hinges, the roof that had taken 11 days. She looked at William reading his book in the chair across from her with the ease of a man who has finally found the place where his particular kind of stillness fits. She thought about what her father had said. A piece of land with your name on it is the one thing they can't take. She understood now what he had not quite finished saying. What came after? Because the land, the deed, the water rights, the certified survey, all of it was the proof. It was not the thing itself. The thing itself was this: a woman who had been handed every reason to become smaller, had chosen every morning to become more. Had picked up the axe and swung it into the first log and the second and everyone after. Had said no when no needed saying. Had said yes when yes was right. Had built the cabin and fought for the water and stood in the room and held her ground. The land was where it happened. The real part was her. And the real part, the part that was Elizabeth Carter, plain and difficult and stubborn and true, that was the one thing no one had ever taken. No one ever would. She looked at the fire. She rocked in her mother's chair. Marjorie's mother's chair, given in the only way that matters freely, and she let the night settle around the cabin, and she felt the solid, permanent, ordinary weight of a life that was hers. All of it, every hard 1 inch, hers.